Shannon Bream is up next. Good night from Washington. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.
It is
Shannon,
so nice to end it on a beautiful, happy note. We need that good news. Congrats to Tommy and his wife. Thanks, Laura. Here is what we have coming up tonight.
Let's have a plan that is going to pass a law, not pass a bill.
Neither side is going to get everything that they want, but that's why it's called a negotiation.
It's a free-for-all as the Senate begins a rare open debate on immigration. At stake, the fate of nearly 2 million so-called dreamers. Iowa Senator Joni Ernst and 6 of her GOP colleagues have rolled out a new plan to secure and succeed on immigration. She joins us live. Plus,
let's see how badly you want it.
President Trump lays out a budget blueprint with a push for rebuilding our infrastructure, even as the administration continues to grapple with questions over the resignation of a White House staffer. Plus, she's been called a showstopper, the Ivanka Trump of North Korea. But just last month, her brother Kim Jong-un was threatening the U.S. with nuclear weapons. Tonight's a debate over whether the media should be fawning over the sister of a murderous dictator. And when night court convenes, fame or fortune, when you only want one of those things. The case of a New Hampshire woman trying to hold on to a $500 million jackpot without giving up her identity heads to court.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. It could be all talk and no action, but that's exactly what the Senate's top Republican promised to do, as lawmakers vote to begin an open-ended debate on immigration tonight, a process that could affect nearly 2 million illegal immigrants. The unusual debate will try to bring together concepts and proposals lauded by President Trump and lawmakers themselves, trying to put it all together into some kind of deal. But is that possible? Correspondent Leland Vitter joins us now with a look at what is and what probably isn't. Good evening, Leland.
Well, good evening, Shannon. We'll start with some good news, and that is that virtually every senator, not just Republicans, and the president agree that they want to agree. Just take a listen.
Democrats are fully committed to protecting dreamers, and we have long supported effective border security.
I want a DACA separate so that we could talk about it and make a deal.
All right, so there it is. The president and the Senate minority leader agreeing, so it should be easy, right? Well, not so fast. Drill down and you will find that they don't even agree on what this deal would cover. On the table, what to do with the so-called dreamers, 1 million plus people brought here illegally when they were kids. Plus, what to do with their parents, also here illegally. A border security package, including the president's wall. Hardline Republicans hope to end immigrants' ability to sponsor family members later, so-called chain migration. What to do with the visa lottery program and calls by the president for preference to higher skilled immigrants. With that list in mind, now listen to the very same people.
We want border security and the other elements that you know about. We think there's a good chance of getting DACA done if the Democrats are serious and they actually want to do it.
The only enemy here is overreach. Now is not the time to now is not the time nor the place to reform the entire legal immigration system. Rather, this is the moment for a narrow bill.
All right, so in an unusual move, the Senate will debate immigration over the coming weeks without a pre-written bill on the table. In a perfect world, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's decision would create the best opportunity for compromise. Now consider this. House Speaker Paul Ryan says he will only bring a bill to the House that has President Trump's support. And many conservative members of the House have serious questions about any bill that could conceivably make it out of the Senate. Enter now 7 conservative Republican senators who have their own proposal. Among them, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, often seen as the president's hardline voice on immigration. All right, we don't have that soundbite, but he says that we want border security and the other elements. He says that, among other things, the president's framework is not an opening bid in negotiations. He now calls it the best and final offer. Problem is that no matter what the offer is, well, Republicans need some Democrats to go along. Republicans have already had 2 recent victories, both on the government shutdown, also on this recent spending bill. Now they want the trifecta with a victory on the immigration reform itself. Shannon?
Thank you, Leland. And as he just mentioned, a group of 7 senators introduced a framework for immigration and DACA recipients today. It's called the Secure and Succeed Act, and it mirrors the White House framework. Joining me now is a co-sponsor of that piece, Republican Senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst. Great to have you back with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon.
Okay, we want to give people a little overview here, so we have a few points for this. A pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million DACA-eligible immigrants, $25 billion for Border Security Trust Fund. You're going to limit chain migration, not get rid of it, but then reallocate diversity visa lottery slots as well. So it sounds a lot like we heard from the White House,
right,
with some tweaks.
It does mirror what the White House had put out previously. So we're excited about the opportunity to really work on this legislation. We think that it will be a good pathway forward for those DACA recipients. And important for the folks back in Iowa is that it does have border security and protections in place in this bill as it is. So we're excited.
Okay, how do you respond to those who say, but you're not getting the wall per se?
Well, we are. In certain areas, of course, there will need to be a physical structure. But in other areas, that may not be necessary. So we can rely on other technologies like radar, overhead security with unmanned vehicles or aerial vehicles, other ways of making sure that we are protecting, adding additional border agents. We don't have to have a physical wall in every location.
Okay, I want to play a little bit of what Congressman Jim Jordan, one of the conservative members over in the House, had to say this weekend on Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace asked him about the proposals we've seen coming out of the Senate. Here's how he responded.
What's being proposed in the Senate is not going to be acceptable to conservatives in the House, guaranteed, because it's not going to be acceptable to the American people. If they do legislation like what is Chairman Goodlatte's legislation that has been worked on by him, Congressman Labrador, Congressman McCall, if they put that kind of legislation on the floor, you will see conservatives support that because, again, Chris, it's consistent with what the American people elected us to do in 2016.
Okay, so you have a few hurdles to get this through the Senate, but if it goes to the House, you know you're going to face some serious opposition there. A lot of folks have termed what they see this as is amnesty when they talk about those 1.8 million who are here illegally. How do you answer those concerns?
I would answer that by saying you can't give amnesty to someone who hasn't broken the law. So the DACA recipients were brought here by their parents who broke the law, but the children of those parents, they did not do anything wrong. They are here, they're living in our communities, they're providing great services, whether as our children's classmates, they're churchgoers, they are volunteering in the communities, they're going to college. So many of them are providing back to their communities. They haven't broken the law. So what we want to do is find a pathway forward to them. And I see it as a great opportunity. So if you look at the sponsors of this bill, I would say they're all very strong conservatives.
That's true. And a couple of them now have lost some endorsements by conservative groups. I want to read a little bit from one group that is not happy about this. They're going after Senators Cotton and Grassley, two of your co-sponsors on this as well. Alapac says, by attempting to triple Obama's DACA amnesty and make that abomination against our Constitution into a permanent law, these senators and the Trump administration are betraying Republican voters on a massive scale. Americans want our existing immigration laws enforced, not new elaborate promises designed to sugarcoat and pass an amnesty bill for illegal aliens.
Well, again, I would push back a little bit because these were children that were brought here. No fault of their own. And the 1.8 million is an approximate number. We know that there are DACA-eligible young men and women out there that did not come forward and register. So to make sure all of them are included, if they would like to participate in a pathway forward, then they would need to come forward. So the large number, while it may seem large to some, we are thinking at least it's all inclusive, and we won't have to go back and readdress some of the concerns later on. But again, these are members of our community. We do value them, and we want to make sure we are doing the right thing by them.
And it sounds like there is some bipartisan happiness on the Senate side that the leader, Senator McConnell, is going to open this up for amendments and allow it to be a very collaborative process. We know it'll take time, but we will track your proposal as it works through this process.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
I appreciate it so much.
Good to see you. Well, the president unveiled his new budget proposal today, featuring an initiative aimed at fixing what he calls our country's crumbling roads and bridges. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry joins us live. Good evening, Ed.
Well, Shannon, good to see you breaking tonight. The big picture is President Trump is proposing a new budget that should be alarming to conservative deficit hawks, because with Republicans running the House, Senate, and White House, that is going to come nowhere close to getting rid of the annual budget deficit that the president repeatedly promised to get rid of. But you have a president right now who wants to build off the momentum of that tax cut victory to move on to infrastructure, which could have the twin benefit of giving him another win while also turning the page from the Rob Porter scandal that has been hounding this White House for several days. But this infrastructure plan is going to cost a lot of money and add even more to that deficit, even as the president today extolled all the upside to getting this done, vowing to not just rebuild those roads, bridges, and airports, but keep a separate campaign promise with doing all that, but also cutting more federal regulations, bringing power back to the states. Plan calls for a total of $1.5 to $1.7 trillion in infrastructure investment. Notice it's not all federal money. The federal share at the beginning will be $200 billion in seed money for grants and loans. They want to spur private investment. Government also investing $50 billion in rural infrastructure development, part of which will bring broadband to farms all across the country. Yet Democrats are arguing this is just not enough federal money.
The Trump plan has the skin of an infrastructure plan, but it lacks the guts. The lack of direct investment would leave out large parts of America, particularly rural America, where local governments don't have the money or the traffic to attract private sector investment. As of a couple of months ago, we have spent $7 trillion in the Middle East. $7 trillion. What a mistake. And we're trying to build roads and bridges and fix bridges that are falling down. And we have a hard time getting the money. It's crazy.
As for that Rob Porter story, Sarah Sanders tried at least to shut the door on it once and for all by insisting top officials were initially misled. But once they learned the full extent of the abuse last Tuesday evening, he was gone within 24 hours. As for why the president has offered support for Porter and yet has not spoken out against domestic violence, Sanders said, look, she speaks on behalf of the president. He relayed that opposition to domestic violence. She relayed it to the press. She basically said, let's move on. I suspect they're not going to do that, Shannon.
I suspect you're right. Ed Henry, thank you very much. Well, some good news for the markets. After the roller coaster Wall Street was on last week, all three major indices finished with broad-based gains today. The Dow rose 410 points, the S&P 500 added 36, and the Nasdaq gained 107 points. President Trump's infrastructure and budget plan is getting some of the credit, but experts are cautioning that the market volatility may not be over just yet. President Trump's daughter-in-law, Vanessa Trump, is doing well tonight, hours after she was sent to a Manhattan hospital after opening a letter addressed to her husband that contained a suspicious white substance. Testing by New York City police later found the white powder to be non-hazardous. Donald Trump Jr. expressed his gratitude for his family's safety on Twitter tonight, but added, truly disgusting that certain individuals choose to express their opposing views with such disturbing behavior. Well, the fight against the opioid crisis is getting some unlikely help as the maker of OxyContin plans to stop promoting the drug to doctors. Purdue Pharma says it has also cut its sales staff in half. OxyContin's been prescribed for treating chronic pain for more than 2 decades and has ended up at the center of the opioid crisis. The company is facing multiple lawsuits filed by city and state officials alleging the drug maker misrepresented the drug's risks. Well, tonight, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg spoke to the National Constitution Center and the University of Pennsylvania Law School in celebration of what will soon be the 25th anniversary of her Supreme Court nomination and confirmation. Covering a wide variety of topics, Ginsburg touched on the Me Too campaign and said it's, quote, staying power.
My hope is not just that it is here to stay, but that it is as effective for the woman who works as a maid in a hotel as it is for Hollywood stars.
Ginsburg has come under fire recently for comments about the 2016 election, blaming sexism for Hillary Clinton's loss. President Obama's former national security advisor, Susan Rice, is back in the spotlight. Up next, an email she sent on President Trump's inauguration day is raising a lot of eyebrows. Plus, her brother is a brutal dictator, and she is part of his administration. So, should the media be fawning over Kim Jong-un's sister? We'll debate. And an eye for an eye as Israel squares off with Iran in Syria. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee are raising new questions about why President Obama's National Security Advisor Susan Rice sent herself an email the day of President Trump's inauguration documenting a conversation with the president 2 weeks earlier concerning the FBI's Trump investigation. Her email emphasized President Obama telling all involved to proceed, quote, by the book. Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley and GOP member Lindsey Graham now want Rice to explain what they're calling an unusual email. The revelation comes as House Democrats are pushing for the release of a memo they say counters the Republican one that raises serious questions and concerns about FBI surveillance of a Trump campaign volunteer. Jordan Sekulow is an attorney and executive director for the American Center for Law and Justice. Joins us live. Good to see you, Jordan.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so let's start with this Susan Rice email, and I'll read a little bit from the Grassley-Graham letter. They say this was sent at about 12:15 on Inauguration Day. Quote, President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by the intelligence and law enforcement communities, quote, by the book. The president stressed that he's not asking about, initiating, or instructing anything from a law enforcement perspective. He reiterated that our law enforcement team needs to proceed as it normally would by the book. What does that email say to you, if anything?
I mean, why was the president at this meeting then? I mean, he's basically saying, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to ask anything. I'm not asking anything. We know is about Trump and Russia because of the briefing that came just before that the senators reported in their letter to Susan Rice. And then again, 2 weeks and a day later, her last act as National Security Advisor on the day that President Trump is being inaugurated, in the minutes that she's got left in the White House, she memorializes a meeting from 2 weeks ago. I tend to believe, Shannon, I mean, this is my honest belief on this, is that this was Susan Rice's attempt to blunt someone who either saw this meeting taking place, may have been someone on the outskirts of the meeting, not a principal, but someone who attended, and that ultimately this would come up. So she wanted to memorialize it so that this did not look like something the White House under the Obama administration was trying to hide. She remembered to do it right before she lost her job.
Well, it's interesting because the senators then spill out a long list of questions that they have that they say that this email raises. They're giving her until February 22nd, I believe it is, to respond. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on that. In the meantime, we'll probably have action much sooner on this Democrat memo that went to the White House. The president said on Friday, or at least his attorney did, White House counsel Don McGahn said, we want to release it, but the DOJ has actually raised objections. So we need you to go back to square one, work on the memo. We want to get it released, but it's got to have some national security issues addressed. Here's what the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee says about that.
Are there sources and methods problems with the memo you submitted?
We're going to sit down with the FBI and go through any concerns that they have, and any legitimate concerns over sources and methods we will redact. But
did you do that before you submitted the memo, Congressman?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Unlike the Republicans, we gave the FBI and the Department of Justice our memo even before we took it up into committee.
Well, even still, by the time I got to the White House, apparently, Jordan, there were still some concerns. But does it sound like a good development to you that now the Democrats are going to take another swing at this? And then maybe we will all get to see the two sides of this story.
Sure. I think everybody, including the president, has said we want to see this memo released. I think this was a political ploy by the Democrats. They were thinking 2 steps, and President Trump was thinking 3 steps ahead of them. Their first step was they were hoping that with the 10-page memo, and by the way, Shannon, the FBI said that even after the release of the House memo, which they had objections to, I'm not trying to hide that, they did, that even after the release of that 3.5-page memo, they had serious problems with this 10-page memo. So it included more information, obviously, and we believe, it's a political ploy that they wanted either, 1, the president to say, absolutely not, I'm not going to release this. He didn't do that. Or 2, have his own White House counsel and legal team redact it themselves so that the president of the United States, the White House, would send the Democrats back a memo with, as we've gotten used to with the government, lots of blacked out pages even, or sections blacked out. And instead, what did President Trump do? He said, you know what, Adam Schiff and Democrats, go work with the FBI. And as you saw in that interview clip, That's exactly what Adam Schiff has said he is going to do. He is willing to sit back down. So ultimately, that memo will come out so long as the Democrats, I guess, take the advice of the FBI, and it seems like they're willing to do that. So I think they tried to play President Trump, and they got played.
Quickly, do you think that we ultimately get the whole batch of material, the FISA applications, all the underlying documents, or do you think so much redaction would have to take place they wouldn't even make sense if we could get them?
Well, we do know a lot about this, unlike any other FISA cases. So we know, the American people know, we've gotten some memos, we've gotten the names, we've gotten the people involved, we know who signed off on the warrants. We know that from Andrew McCabe's testimony, the dossier was the basis, the only way they would go after a FISA warrant in the court. So it is unique. There are two ways this could happen under the current system of law. One is the court can do it. So a judge on the FISA court who overheard these cases or granted these warrants to surveil Carter Page, based off the dossier, could say, this is absurd. I'm pretty upset by what I'm hearing, and can actually do this on their own. They can release this. They have to make the redactions, but they can release it, and they may consult the executive, but they don't have to, Shannon. So they don't have to go to the White House. They could just release it. The second way is if the House Intelligence Committee was able to get their hands on this, they could go through the same process as they did through the memo, vote on it, and then send it to the White House. It may have a lot of redactions, but ultimately this may be the only way to settle this issue, though I think the Democrats are having a tough time with their 10-page memo. As I learned in law school, if you can't respond to a 3.5-page memo with a 2-page memo, you got some problems.
Yeah, we'll watch and see, because it seems like all sides are saying they want it out there, so we'll see if they all make good on that. Jordan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, he's accused of human rights abuses and has threatened the U.S. with nuclear weapons. So why would the media go gaga for the North Korean dictator's sister? She's also part of his ruling regime. We'll discuss after the break. Plus, why the unveiling of the portraits of a former president and first lady left many speechless. The Pyeongchang Winter Olympics opened this past weekend to much fanfare, but even with all the sports to watch, a lot of eyes were also watching the younger sister of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Correspondent Trace Gallagher joins us now with a look at some of the coverage that some felt went astray. Hello, Trace.
Hi, Shannon. You might think the high point of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics would be some phenomenal athletic achievement, but according to USA Today, the most indelible memory of the games could be the cheerleaders from North Korea. ABC News also thought Kim Jong-un's army of beauties commanded the spotlight, and yet the heaping praise piled on the cheer squad paled in comparison to the glowing reviews of Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, who CNN suggested was, quote, stealing the show. And the New York Times wrote that she turns on the charm, which prompted GOP Senator Lindsey Graham to tweet, quoting here, Kim Jong-un has to be tremendously pleased with the coverage his sister Kim Yo-jong received from the international media. Frankly, coverage has been over the top. But the media did manage to balance the rave reviews of North Korea with scathing reviews of the U.S. CNN even used a North Korean source to blast Vice President Mike Pence. Watch.
The biggest insult, the North Koreans say, was that the vice president chose to stay seated and he didn't clap when the unified Korean Olympic team came out during the opening ceremonies. My source called it an undignified act that degraded the status of the United States.
CNN also criticized Pence for inviting Fred Warmbier to the games. He's the father of Otto Warmbier, the University of Virginia student who was imprisoned by North Korea until he was sent home with severe brain damage. Mr. Warmbier says he didn't come to make a political statement, saying North Korea's actions speak for themselves. Here he is.
Civilized country does this. I'm telling the truth about the regime's treatment of my son. But guess what? They do this to countless other people,
including Kim Jong-un's own people, who, according to South Korea, are starved, oppressed, and executed by the thousands just to, quote, keep them in line. Yet despite the public chill between the U.S. and North Korea during these games, the Washington Post says private meetings in South Korea could lead to direct talks between the U.S. and Pyongyang. Though Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says it's too early to tell and that it's really up to the North Koreans to decide when they are ready to engage. And finally, it's worth noting that while North and South Korea's joint women's hockey team may not take home the gold, a member of the International Olympic Committee says they should be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Shannon.
We have seen some interesting winners before. Trace, thank you very much. So what about all that media praise for Kim Jong-un's sister? Let's talk about it with Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor Charles Hurt, who's already chuckling, and the former director of strategic communications for Hillary Clinton, Adrienne Elrod. Thank you both for coming in today.
Great to be with you, Shannon.
Okay, so Adrienne, what did you make of this over the weekend? It got a lot of attention on social media.
Yeah, it got a lot of attention on social media, and it was really irresponsible by the way that some of the national media organizations were glamorizing her, portraying her as somebody who, I don't know if it was because she doesn't maybe look the part of what they think a dictator may look like, if she was a little bit more glamorous in her appearance than they thought, but it was really, really irresponsible. I mean, she is the sister of the most brutal dictator in the world who has done horrifying things to the people of North Korea and, of course, to some American citizens as well. So it's really irresponsible.
Well, the truth is, I mean, she's part of the regime. She's part of the ruling party.
Sure,
she's the has some kind of title, Minister of Propaganda. I mean, so Charlie, she's not just an innocent bystander who happens to be the sister of this guy.
Exactly.
I mean, she's actively involved.
Exactly. For once, I think the internet got it right. It was akin to Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun showing up at the 36 Olympics. And, honestly, it's amazing to look at the coverage of this and how not only how stupid it is and how shallow it is, but how totally un-American it is. And the disdain for freedom that is revealed in all of this, I think, is pretty shocking. But I do think that to bring it back to sort of modern politics in America, it's why Donald Trump won the presidency, is because he spotted this in the media and he went after this exact thing in the media and managed to beat both Democrats and Republicans and largely on that message, I think.
Well, and something, Trace said one of Lindsey Graham's tweets, the senator also said this: to call her and the Kim regime anything less than a tyrannical family and killer does the world community at large and the people of North Korea suffering under their rule a great disservice. I mean, Adrienne, that's what we have to remember here, regardless of what media outlet you are, where you're coming from.
Sure.
I mean, there are millions of people there who have no freedom. I mean, no hope at life. A lot of them, no food or electricity.
Right,
or internet.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think Senator Graham was spot on in his tweet. There are also a lot of Democrats and Republicans who have both largely panned the way some of the media has been covering this. You've seen some progressive media outlets that have panned other media outlets for the way they've covered this. So again, to cover his sister as anything but a horrifying member of this terrible regime that has done deplorable things to the people of North Korea and again other people as well, including American citizens, is completely irresponsible.
All right, so let's take this much lighter, because today we had the portrait unveilings for the former President Barack Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama. And there were mixed reviews. There were a lot of people who had things to say. In the New York Times, their art critic, I think it was, who wrote this, he said, Mr. Wiley depicts Mr. Obama not as a self-assured standard issue bureaucrat, but as an alert and troubled thinker. His is the one where he's in the nice chair, but he's sort of in the middle of a bunch of plants. And then this is what they said, and we'll explain some of that. But this is what he said about the First Lady. To be honest, I was hoping for a bolder, more incisive image of the strong-voiced person I imagined this former First Lady to be. So let's show both of these so people can see what we're talking about. Now, to be fair, the artist who did the former presidents, he said all of those flowers represent something. The different plants are from Kenya and Hawaii and Chicago and different places in his life. Charlie? You look a little skeptical. I think that looks like the former president. It looks like him.
No, it's the likeness of him is very interesting and I think good. But then they stick him in a wall of ivy, which I don't really understand. And the flowers may represent different things, but the ivy doesn't. I don't think really. And then of course the one of her. Maybe you want to get to that
one too.
The one of her. It's just so flat and sort of dynamic that it's kind of hard to really get a sense of her, and I don't think it really looks like her even. Yeah. But at the end of the day, what I find bothersome about both of them is they're both kind of a statement. And when I think of his presidency, and I don't mean this entirely as a negative, I mean this is positive too. His presidency was very much of a statement, and so I guess in that sense it's accurate. But I don't see these two things holding up very well over time.
All right, quickly from you.
No, I think these portraits are absolutely beautiful. I mean, these are Obama he was the first African American elected president of the United States. These are portraits that will be sitting in the National Portrait Gallery for eternity. I think they wanted something a little different. They went with two very creative.
Got it.
No, but a little unconventional, which is good. And they went with two very creative artists who have been socially active on a number of issues. And I think they reflected, a very unique viewpoint of these two people. And again, children will be coming into this museum for years and years and will look up to these portraits as the first, African-American family that occupied the White House.
All right, Adrian and Charlie, thank you both very much.
Shannon.
Good to see you. Our tensions rising anew in the Middle East over the weekend. We've got the latest on Israel's strikes in Syria and why Benjamin Netanyahu is pointing the finger directly at Iran. New tensions tonight in Syria after a showdown between Israel and Iranian-backed forces over the weekend. Correspondent David Lee Miller has the story.
For the first time in more than 30 years, an Israeli fighter jet was shot down. The American-made F-16 was on an air raid over Syria on Saturday when it was struck by debris from anti-aircraft fire. The aircraft crashed on the Israel side of the border. The pilot and navigator ejected to safety. Local residents were alarmed.
We didn't know this was a jet. We heard a terrible boom, and to add to this, there was a siren, and we knew that something was going on in the north. It's a feeling like we are at war.
The fighter jet was on a mission to destroy an Iranian mobile drone launcher in Palmyra, Syria. Only hours earlier, Israel said, an Iranian drone crossed into Israeli airspace. Israel released video showing what it says is the drone being shot out of the sky by one of its Apache helicopters. Iran denied having anything to do with the drone and called the Israeli version of events ridiculous. Israel's prime minister didn't buy it.
Israel holds Iran and its Syrian host responsible for today's aggression. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our sovereignty and our security.
In addition to going after the drone launch site, Israel targeted other military facilities operated by Syria and its Iranian ally. Although Israel lost an F-16, roughly half of Syria's air defenses were reportedly destroyed. Russia, which has troops in Syria supporting the regime of Bashar al-Assad, urged all parties to exercise restraint and to avoid actions that could make the situation worse. The U.S. State Department condemned Iran and reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself. Despite the rhetoric, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who is in the region, has no plans to visit the Jewish state. Shannon?
David Lee Miller, thank you. President Trump offering condolences today to Russian President Vladimir Putin over that deadly crash of a Russian airliner. All 65 passengers and 6 crew members died when the plane crashed minutes after takeoff Sunday. Investigators have ruled out terrorism as the cause of the crash. Next up, a New Hampshire woman's costly pursuit of privacy, the Powerball winner risking millions to remain anonymous. Our legal eagles debate that case next in night court, and later leave it to alcohol to bring 2 opposing parties together. Night court is now in session. Last week, we told you about the woman who wants the fortune but not the fame after winning $560 million in a Powerball jackpot. The New Hampshire woman has filed a lawsuit to protect her privacy after finding out that she can't remain anonymous if she redeems her ticket. She thought she was doing the right thing when she signed the ticket, locked it away, and then called a lawyer. But it turns out by signing it with her real name, it now means she'll have to go public to collect the more than $500 million. And every day she's not collecting it, she's actually losing tens of thousands of dollars in interest. So does she have a chance now at preserving her privacy? The case heads to court tomorrow. Our legal eagles, though, are going to figure it out tonight. Criminal defense attorney and Fox News legal analyst Mercedes Colwin and Eric Chase, a criminal defense attorney. Great to have you both with us.
Great to be on.
Okay.
Thank you, Mercedes.
I want to talk a little bit about what is in her complaint, why she's trying now to get her privacy. Her attorney says this: without the aid of counsel, petitioner went to the commission website, read the instructions on the back of her winning ticket. She learned that the ticket was a, quote, a bearer instrument until such time as a signature is placed in the designated area. Following the commission's instructions, she signed the back of the ticket, and later on, then she contacted counsel. So, Mercedes, where'd she go wrong?
Oh, unfortunately for her, she didn't continue reading the ticket. It said very clearly that she could put it in a trust, thereby avoiding actually her identification. But she didn't continue reading that. It's very clear in the instructions. If you go on the website, it does talk about claiming your ticket. What the instructions clearly say is that if you can put it in a trust, then you avoid this whole issue about disclosing your identity. But she didn't continue reading it. So it's unfortunate. But unfortunately for her, she didn't continue reading it. She's going to lose tomorrow.
All right, so the three of us would say then as attorneys, you got to call your lawyer first before you make any big decisions. But Eric, I can understand how she would see this thing and say, well, unless I sign it, what if I drop it, somebody else picks it up, I'm going to lose everything. I better sign this thing and put it away. But the state is not so convinced. The Attorney General there, Gordon McDonald, in his filing says, Jane Doe argues that winning in excess of $500 million is life-altering money and that she prefers to live as normal a life as possible. The opportunity for life-altering money is the essence of a large jackpot lottery such as Powerball. Doe's life will be altered whether her name is released or not. Her understandable yearning for normalcy after entering a lottery to win hundreds of millions of dollars is not sufficient basis to shut the public out of the business of the government. So, Eric, they're saying no matter what, this is going to change your life. And when you win $500 million, you have to know that.
First, imagine what she was going through at the moment she looked at her ticket and realized she just won over $500 million. And the decision-making process was not as good as it should have been. And, of course, she made a mistake. But the lottery commissioner's comments are just way out of line. There is a mechanism for remaining anonymous, and that's the use of the trust, as has already been pointed out. So his comments about the fact that life is going to be changed, her name should come out, they're just off the mark. The question here is, should she be penalized for making the very minor mistake of, in the excitement of that moment, signing the back of the ticket? And one of the important things to remember is that she called the commission first, and the commission gave her advice, very bad advice. And as they say in the filings, in her filings, her lawyer said, it's akin to legal advice. And there may even be some type of estoppel argument that the commission cannot now argue that that mistake is going to prevent her from protecting herself. And aren't we supposed to be looking at what the ultimate outcome should be? If there's a mechanism for protection and she wants to use it, she should, and I think ultimately she will be allowed to do so.
Well, you start using the word estoppel, and I start going flashbacks to law school and the bar exam. But these are important legal arguments. I mean, Mercedes, these states, and there are a number of states that will allow you to remain anonymous, others that will allow you to do this through a trust. But the vast majority of states want people to know who the winners are. They want you to stay in there with your big fake check because the publicity helps them sell more tickets. Sure. Any chance that they're able to convince this judge otherwise?
Doubtful, because frankly, it's all about transparency. Anybody that's ever litigated with the government, it's all about transparency. They have to go forward. This is what happens when you purchase these lotto tickets. It's clear in the rules. Great that you may have an estoppel argument, but frankly, it doesn't trump the fact that the instructions are so clear. You go on the website, it's clearly defined for anyone that wins the lottery what they have to do to ensure their anonymity. She didn't comply with what was stated very clearly on those instructions. Eric, so it's unfortunate for her.
Eric, what do you make of those who say, though, by bringing this lawsuit, first of all, she is losing the money on the interest that she would collect every day. She's not collecting this thing. And so her team is arguing they need to get this resolved. But what about those who say that by doing this, she's actually drawing so much attention that if she loses, as Mercedes predict, now everyone in the world is going to want to know who this woman was?
Well, first, let's forget about the $14,000 approximate dollars she's losing a day from her $500+ million fortune. So I'm not really swayed by that argument. But this is not about transparency. This is about rules. And New Hampshire does allow for the use of a trust. Yes, you have to publish the winner, but the winner can be a trust. The problem is she didn't properly execute the procedure, and will the judge ultimately excuse her either because the commission advised her or because it's a mistake that's so small? Hey, white it out, write in the name of the trust. You're going to have the transparency that's required by the New Hampshire law.
All right. Well, this goes to trial tomorrow. We will watch and see how this night court case turns out in reality. In the meantime, thank you both for the preview. Great to see you tonight.
Great to see you. Thanks, Shannon.
And at home, let us know what you think at Shannon Bream or at Fox News Night. We want to see how you, the jury out there, would rule on this. In the meantime, Senate leaders Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer traded barbs today over a very contentious topic, bourbon. More on their lighthearted spat after this break. Senate leaders, Republican Mitch McConnell and Democrat Chuck Schumer, are often locked in very tough debates on Capitol Hill. But today, The pair showed a different side to their relationship at the University of Louisville, trading barbs over a Kentucky staple. Don't mess around with their bourbon.
Now, here's another thing you might not realize we have in common: bourbon. It turns out that Brooklyn, where I was born, raised, and still proudly live, produces some of the best bourbon in the world.
So there's no such thing as Brooklyn bourbon. And by the way, there was a whole lot more to that story, and it turns out that stuff from Brooklyn may have actually come from Kentucky, at least in some part of the process. Anyway, it's back to reality for those two now. The pair came back to Washington to get back to work on that open-ended immigration debate, which started tonight. They voted on it, and it apparently is going to allow amendments and all kinds of input from both sides, although all sides now say what passes in the Senate is going to have a much tougher time in the House. So we'll keep an eye on that, the president's infrastructure and budget proposal as well, and all the happenings here in Washington, because it's never over. So we're glad you closed the night out with us. Most watched, most trusted, and most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. For Fox News at Night, I'm Shannon Bream.